Mr. Crain, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your oral remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and the ranking member and members of the subcommittee. My name is Charles Crain, and I'm the Vice President of Domestic Policy at the National Association of Manufacturers. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the NAM's members and the 13 million people who make things in America. Manufacturing supports local communities and creates well-paying jobs. Manufacturing pioneers groundbreaking technologies, including the innovations necessary to combat climate change. And manufacturing powers economic growth here at home and supports American competitiveness on the world stage. But today, manufacturers are facing a regulatory onslaught. The total cost of federal regulations across the economy exceeds $3 trillion every year. Zeroing in on manufacturing, our industry faces $350 billion each year in regulatory costs. That's nearly a 30% increase from just a decade ago. And the average individual manufacturer pays more than $29,000 per employee per year to comply with federal regulations. And that figure rises to more than $50,000 for small manufacturers. $50,000 every employee every year. For a small company with just 20 employees, that's $1 million that's diverted every year from job creation or from R&D. The SEC's climate rule is at the center of this regulatory onslaught. The rule would impose tremendous costs on manufacturers of all sizes while overwhelming investors with immaterial information. And the SEC hasn't done the work to show that the rule's benefits outweigh its cost or that it's even within the SEC's legal authority. The rule's Scope 3 mandate exemplifies these flaws. Requiring larger companies to report their supply chain emissions is a significant burden, and it will fall directly on their small and privately held suppliers because it's their emissions that the SEC wants to know about. These small businesses will face an untenable choice between building brand new systems, buying expensive equipment, or potentially losing valuable customers. For the larger companies that are subject to the Scope 3 requirement, the SEC has admitted that it cannot fully and accurately quantify the cost of Scope 3 reporting. That's already a red flag for such a substantial requirement. But for the small businesses that are swept into these large companies' Scope 3 efforts, the SEC hasn't even tried. The SEC's proposal does not include any discussion of the Scope 3 cost that will fall on small and privately held businesses. The SEC has taken a similar approach to the climate rule's accounting requirements. The rule requires companies to conduct a convoluted tagging exercise to identify individual expenses that might be climate-related. Disclosure of those impacts would then live in the company's financial statements. Along with Scope 3, this is one of the most consequential and difficult portions of the rule. Yet the SEC has offered no tailoring, no delay, no flexibility at all for small businesses. Because these disclosures will be part of companies' financial statements, they'll be subject to external audit. But when the SEC set out to estimate the cost of that audit, it came up with an estimate of just $15,000. $15,000 to audit a brand new procedure that stretches down into individual invoices, that requires complicated judgment calls, and that might require a whole separate set of books for some companies. This rule. And these flaws call into question the legality of the rule itself. Under the APA, rules can't just ignore a major aspect of a rulemaking problem, like the impact of Scope 3 on small businesses. They can't be based on faulty cost-benefit analysis. And perhaps most importantly, they can't exceed an agency's statutory authority. The SEC has only been authorized by Congress to require material disclosures to help investors make informed decisions, not to set climate policy. But the climate rule far exceeds what any reasonable investor would need to know about a company's climate-related risks. So we're left with a rule that delves into policy issues that are well outside the SEC's expertise or authority. Overall, the SEC says that the climate rule will cost more than $400,000 every year for small public companies. That's a huge resource diversion before even taking into account all the flaws in the SEC's cost analysis. Many small manufacturers will be forced to hire new staff or even expensive ESG consultants to keep up with this burden, all at the expense of manufacturing investment here in the United States. If the climate rule is finalized, small manufacturers and their workers will be the hardest hit. Manufacturers therefore greatly appreciate this subcommittee's efforts to rein in the SEC's regulatory overreach. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crain.